And welcome to the Perdie channel. I am your host, Matt Perdie, and I had to find the camera for a second. I am sorry for the delay before another episode because my AC was running full blast and it got clogged up and it flooded this room and I had to rip all the carpet up. Isn't that fantastic, Alexandra?
Oh, it's horrible. Quite the cross.
Yeah, it's quite the cross. I wish I would always phrase things like that in my head. I need to work on that.
Yeah, well, my mom always used to say, offer it up.
Offer it up.
It's something that God's giving you to offer up.
Offer it up. You know, that's like the Catholic version of, oh, God bless you, you know, like.
Offer it up.
Yeah.
It's true.
It's hilarious. So if you guys hear some snoring, you can't see him, but my dog in the right side of this frame, a little bit below the table, is sleeping and snoring, and he is not getting up or holding back his snoring whatsoever. So just so you're wondering what that sound is, that's what it is. So here today we have Alexandra. She is here, and she has made an oath to Christ, which is pretty interesting. Trying to learn a little bit more about that. So can you tell us about what this oath is?
Sure. And thank you for having me on, Matt. This is a great opportunity. Anytime. So, yeah, it's called an oath against modernism. It was actually created by St. Pius X. And he did it during a time, just to kind of date people, this is before Vatican II, before 1962. Basically, St. Pius X was late 1800s, early 1900s. So 1903, I think he passed away. Anyways, he was fighting this idea of modernism, which was this, as he termed it, a synthesis of all heresy. All the different heresies the church has dealt with since the beginning of the church, since the founding of Christ. There's been different heresies that pop up. But he called this one modernism, which was a synthesis of all the different ones. And the reason why I was kind of think of it like a mixed bag, a big compilation of all the heresies in one. So, instead of just fighting one head-to-head on, whether Christ is God or whether Mary's the mother of God, all these different heresies, they were a mixed bag of everything put together. So he called it a synthesis of all heresies, and he basically wanted to stamp it out of the church. So he saw different priests, different religious, different laity, teachers, theologians, etc., coming in and starting to believe this, and the I guess you say the core, the seed of modernism is evolution, and so that was really being pushed. We had the communists that were pushing this at the time. Almost every communist is a heavy believer in evolution. And so he wanted to stamp it out, because what eventually ended up coming out is this idea that any dogma of the church, so a dogma is a truth of the church, can be expounded on, can be evolved with the time. So it might have been wrong, starting this time or that time, but the next decade or whatever they want. The rules were all over the place. They could change it, saying, well, I guess marriage in the beginning was between one man and woman, but, things evolve, and so maybe it's not, And
so they were thinking about stuff like that even like the early 1900s, late 1800s?
Yeah, they've always had, homosexuality goes way back. You had it even during the time of the apostles. So they had to fight that, throughout the centuries. And so he created this oath. He's like, that's what we gotta knock this out of the church. So I want all my teachers, all my theologians, all my priests, all my religious to take this oath. If you refuse to take the oath, which is an oath basically to Christ, say, no, I don't believe in modernism. No, I hold the doctrines and dogmas of the church the same as they were in the beginning and is now and never shall be, basically. And he said, if you don't take the oath, you're gone, so.
Wow. So wait, let's pause you there. So when he said, if you don't take the oath, you're gone, I know you're paraphrasing him, but
sure.
When you say that, is he saying that to the people that are serving in the church as leaders, or is he saying that to the laymen as well?
He was saying it because there were some laymen that were teachers, in Catholic schools at the time. He was heavily involved in reforming Catholic action in the sense of getting involved in every level, whether it's reforming the music or the liturgy. He was the Pope that ended up lowering the communion, the first communion age. So before, you might not receive communion until like age 13, for example. And he lowered it to the age of reason. So as long as the child has reason, they could receive communion. So it was a huge thing. And he also promoted daily communion as well. And so he was involved in almost every level. And so when he made this oath against martyrdom, it was on purpose to stamp out this error that was seeping into the church in different ways, globally, basically. It wasn't just in a particular area. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you were inspired by his stand against modernism and him calling it out. And I guess you're saying he officially made an oath himself.
He did. He wrote it. So there's an official, I don't know how many pages. If you print it, it might be like 3 or 5 pages maybe of this oath, depending on the size of your paper. So it's not too big, but it's very explicit on what it's saying for particular details of fighting against modernism. Like, you don't believe truth can evolve, for example. It's a big one because, like I told you, evolution was the seed kind of feeding this whole thing. And if truth can change, then there is no absolute truth. And so he would lay it out like, you can't. So he required, at the time of his papacy, he required all the priests and teachers, theologians, religious to take the vow in order to stamp out some of the more heretical people that were coming in. And he didn't want to, it's a serious thing to try to corrupt the faithful. So if he could stamp it out in some way with an oath against modernism, it was a good step in the right direction.
So, I imagine when you take an oath like this, especially when you make an oath like this to Christ, it comes with a lot of massive commitment, right? Can you tell me what this means in terms of like your daily action and what you do as you've made this oath? Like, how does that affect your life?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. I guess backing it up, today, just so there's a little bit more context, today it's not required to take the oath against modernism.
Hold on. Why, if I may, why is it not required?
Vatican II came, which I guess is a whole thing we'll get into, but it was one of the things they did away with. So they did away with the oath against modernism.
So a thing called Vatican II happened, and suddenly this oath was stripped away. Was it Paul VI?
I'm not exactly sure.
Or was it
it was during Vatican
II,
but I'm not sure which pope it ended up happening under. I don't want to say which. It could have been John the 23rd, or it could have been Paul VI. But it was during Vatican II, which both of them were during those two times. So it was during that whole, they call it a reform, but it's actually a revolt. That they decided to throw this out because obviously it stopped them from advancing the agenda they're going for. So
yeah. But you took this oath despite the fact that the church no longer requires it from anyone.
So I did it personally, but then as I became a teacher for the Society of St. Pius X, they are one of the groups that still require it to be said by their teachers, their priests, their religious. We all did it together as a group of teachers. But I did it years and years before that, before I even got connected to the society.
So let's just start with why. Why did you decide to do this despite, it not being a requirement in, the general church, the larger church, or I guess you could say the New Order facet of the church no longer requires it.
Novus Ordo means New Order.
Yeah, and I'm not even making that up, but I have a lot of names for it, but we'll start with New Order for now.
Yeah.
But
well, I guess it does start with the New Order in the sense of why I decided to do it, because back in college, I started out as a music professor. Long story short, I ended up going into a theology major with a minor in catechetics. And from everything that we were learning, and it was a pretty good group of theologians there, I would say. The majority of them were very conservative, but you had some liberals there. So there was that one of the liberals that were there that were in charge of putting my senior thesis together under him. He was more leaning towards a Novus Ordo. So when he found out, I actually chose to do my senior thesis on the de-emphasization of sacrifice in the Mass. So that was one of the things that happened during Vatican II, is the Mass is no longer a sacrifice. Instead, it is a supper. And so I wanted to show how that move kind of happened in my senior thesis, and the importance why, for them, why they removed it, and also why we had it. So there was this huge, I even went around campus asking people, well, what do you think the Mass is? Most people are like, oh, just a place where we go to pray. Very simple. Or it's just like the Last Supper, kind of thing. But barely anyone ever said it's a sacrifice. And so I'm like, something happened. And so that's what it kind of sparked my interest in doing my senior thesis on that topic. And it was interesting. I had to do my topic on an off year, which was very providential, because the professor said, being very hands-off for off-year people, because I ended up doing a semester abroad in Rome, that we had to do less meetings with him. And when he found out, when I ended up picking for my topic, he said, if I found out what you picked in the beginning, and because I wasn't really paying attention, he confessed to that I would have never let you do this.
Why?
And, it's kind of interesting. It gets really heated as we progress towards the end of my senior thesis, because I was using the church's dogmas and doctrines to prove what I've been saying. So you have from the time of Christ, who established the Mass, to the time of the apostles, and everything that's been throughout the centuries, this understanding that the Mass is the sacrifice of Calvary. And it is Christ's sacrifice that he made present even to us today. That's the mystery and the amazing way that God set up this, that we could be there at Calvary even today, there at the Mass. Well, it was shocking to find out why did it just disappear? Why did that understanding just get erased, basically? And it was because of modernism. So that ties it back to the reason why I discovered St. Pius X. He was a big defender against, he even wrote a encyclical against modernism. There's a little catechism of St. Pius X against modernism. So he kind of lays it all out. Like, this is what they were really pushing. This is what the heresies they were promoting. And one of them was to basically destroy the Mass. And so I'm like, well, that's really interesting. And of course, you run into his oath against modernism. I'm like, wow, this is just amazing. I read through it. And I was like, I believe every single word he put in here. So I think at the time, I was here in Virginia, but I went to a nearby chapel and just said the oath. And I was like, yeah, this is the fight I want to be involved in.
It's incredible. So that's why you did it. Now tell me, what does this entail in your daily life?
Well, for me, it entails that I keep true to that oath in the sense of fighting modernism wherever it can be found. Now, that could be anywhere from a daily conversation with somebody. I can't be like, oh, I'm really embarrassed to say that this is the truth. I'm going to not say, no, actually, you shouldn't, because you'll be in big trouble.
Wow.
Because you said that you would tell the truth, basically, and that the truth doesn't involve. So don't get involved in this crazy lie, as it were. So
no holding back what you're thinking just to make someone feel comfortable.
Yeah. And then there's been lots of saints that inspired me to watch that in certain ways. Like there's the story of, it's not very well known because it's a story of Saint Bernadette, and it's still in French, so it's not in English. But a priest had given a sermon about it, and she was going back and forth. So it's Our Lady of Lourdes, and she's going back and forth to the grotto to see Our Lady. And one time, 6 Protestants came up to her on her way to see Our Lady, and they asked her, "What do I have to do in order to be saved?" And she thought, well, all I have to say is that, you have to be good, listen to God's 10 commandments, that kind of thing. And when she got to the grotto, Our Lady was sad and crying. And she says, well, why are you sad? She goes, because you didn't tell the truth. And she's like, and for me, that struck me. I'm like, what? She kind of did say the truth, but she didn't tell the whole truth. She said, if you told them they had to become Catholic, because it's the one true faith, then all 5 out of the 6 would have converted and been saved. But since you didn't tell them, all of them were lost. And so she did penance for that later. But it reminded me, like, wow, that's the truth we have to tell. You have to tell the truth that even when, and she confessed that she was kind of like, she didn't want to, she knew she should have told them they needed to become Catholic, but she didn't because she was trying to be nice. You know?
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like, in trying to be nice, we actually don't really do people a proper service. We don't
Exactly.
do the most generous thing we could possibly do to them. But I say we because I am also one of these hardcore Catholics now. I haven't taken an official oath or anything like that, but I think I'm naturally fighting Modernism in a lot of the work I do. But yeah, it's. But yeah, tell us, like, when did you make this oath?
Well, let's see if I had to do it. It was probably during my college years.
Okay.
Yeah, so about 2010 to 2012. So around there.
Now, how do people react when you tell them that you've made this oath to Christ, this specific oath?
Well, it's kind of interesting. So some people, they're like, well, what is that?
Yeah.
Kind of
like me. I'm like, bah, what is this?
What is this?
No, I mean, I think you have a general idea. But.
Yeah, it's fun. I wish I brought like a copy and I could read some of the exact quotes from it. It's great. People should look it up. You know, The Oath Against Modernism by St. Pius X. But he words it so perfectly, like everything you should stand against, everything that you should do as a Catholic against the worst enemy we have during this century, which is modernism. That's just eating up the church in so many different levels and different ways. And so, I mean, when I tell people, it's either they don't know or they're like, wow, that's really good. Like, they're comforted because, I mean, when I joined, I guess, the society as a teacher, I'm a catechist teacher, and you're like, have you heard of St. Pius X's oath again? Oh, yeah, I've already taken it. Oh, that's so good. That's great. Okay, well, we're going to do it again as a group, but, you know, that means you're right on where we need you. You know, like, you're not some, you know, crazy heretic of some sort.
Yeah, for sure. So then let's jump straight to Vatican II. Can you define, as simply as you possibly can, what Vatican II is?
Vatican II is a time bomb in the church, and it blew up every level of the faith that we have. I guess in a summary, it was a time bomb that took off. You know, it wasn't something that happened. Some people are like, well, everything started at Vatican II. Well, actually, kind of not, because we had the modernists that were working beforehand. Like, for example, there was Cardinal Bonini. He's the mastermind behind the creation of the Novus Ordo, and he was a known Mason.
Bunini is like the dumbest name for a person, right? I'm sorry. No offense to innocent people named Bunini, but that is like if I looked up like a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, like it would be like this dude rubbing his hand together called Bunini. Yeah, it's just such an evil sounding name. Yeah,
well, he was really evil. He hated the Mass at the heart of it. And he wrote a book. It's like this thick. And I had to read it. Almost threw up.
I'm sorry.
But he wanted to destroy every aspect of the Mass. He's like, oh, let's change this because of this, you know, and change that. As a Freemason, the Freemasons had been attacking the church throughout different centuries. But they decided, and they wrote a manifesto, that they would have to infiltrate. And once they infiltrated, because, you know, attacking the church, persecuting the church, trying to kill the church, you know, through the martyrs, it wasn't working. Every time they killed, you know, some martyr, you know, the church would blossom forth with a lot more converts.
Yeah, people see that and they're like, oh, it's hardcore.
Yeah, exactly. They just died for something, you know. So what is this? What is it that they actually died for? So it wasn't working for them. So they had to rewrite a whole plan of what they were going to do, and they're going to infiltrate the church. They said that's the only way to do it.
So I guess my question would then go to, how do you know he was motivated by his beliefs from the
Freemasons?
For Freemasons, yeah, I'm sorry. It's not part of my everyday dialect yet. I'm still a new Catholic.
The Freemasons are very secretive. That's like, when you get into the highest realms of Freemasonry, it's very secretive. And the way you could tell his motives is through all of his actions and his writings, like I told you about that book. And he wanted to destroy certain things for a certain reason. Like, for example, changing Mass to definitely emphasize supper and not crucifixion. So in other words, emphasize the Last Supper and not the crucifixion. Like, erase that. And that's what they did with the Vatican II documents. So a document right before Vatican II must have mentioned the word sacrifice and Christ's being crucified on the cross, you know, over 200 times. You get to the Vatican II documents, barely mentioned 4 times.
I see. So it's not like they completely erased it. They actually just lessened it to an extreme degree that
and then
you would
heightened
overlook
everything
it.
else. Yeah, and then heightened everything else. So it's like it's super this and definitely not really that.
So when you're talking about like Mr. Bunini, it's such a fun name to say, though, right? It's such a
Annibale Bunini is his full name.
Oh my gosh!
And the cardinal, but when he died, the Freemasons carried him to his grave.
Really?
And he has if you go to his gravestone, he has the I don't know if you know what the Freemasonic symbol is, but it's kind of like a triangle with the all-seeing eye.
Okay.
Freemasonic symbol that they all use, and that's on his gravestone as well. So it was confirmed. I forget what the priest's name is. He accidentally picked up one of Cardinal's briefcases, opened it up, and saw him on the highest list of the Freemasons.
So you're saying he was up there in the
He was very high up there, yeah.
And
it was a kind
status.
of and they're very big at, they're kind of like, think of the New York Mafia, that once they find out you know something, they try to knock you out. So that priest ended up disappearing and all this other stuff, and trying to cover it all out, like, no, it's fake news. But it's not. It was real, and so many things proved it, from the way that he was taking everything, the way, he was very high up in the Vatican. And so he had free reign from John the 23rd and Paul VI, which Paul VI ended up banning him at one point after he found out some of his evil deeds.
Way after all the damage was
then
done.
he brought him back. And so, it was like, it was kind of like a McCarrot thing. They're like, he's bad, let's send him off. And then later bring him back and like put him into a high position again.
Right.
So he created quite the chaos in the church. But he was one of the masterminds behind the Novus Ordo Mass itself, because he's the one who he stripped out 85% of the prayers that were in the Mass for centuries and centuries and centuries, to simplify it to things he wrote on a napkin, as they say, and compiled into what is now known as the Novus Ordo. And it didn't go as far. There are some changes that the Novus Ordo don't have in it that he had written in his book, because he didn't get to finish all implementing everything, but he implemented a lot.
Was Bonini fat?
Yeah, she was. Yeah, very chubby face, very big. Yeah, it's
always,
interesting.
It's always the people with the fat face that are destroying civilization,
It's interesting point. Yeah, like Mao Zedong.
Yeah, exactly.
Very big.
He should have given some of that food to the people dying, and he's responsible for. But but we're focused on Bonini, the Bonini form of communism for right now. Or Freemasonry. I mean, there's so much overlay at this point, right? So
yeah, and it happened at different levels. He was just one character from the Freemasons that was in the church. You have, like, for example, if we come back to the U.S., you had Bella Dodd. She ended up being converted by Bishop Fulton Sheen. And she ends up testifying before the U.S. Congress, because there was this anti-communist act that was trying to stamp out all the communists at the time, the 1930s, 40s, and all that. Apparently, I just found out it still exists, and you can still use it, the anti-communist act. Anyways.
Trump, are you watching right now?
You got to use it.
You've got a tool you can use right now for that communist over there is trying to become mayor of New York.
Exactly. Exactly.
Continue.
So Bella Dodd, she was in charge. She was put in place to put the communist men into the priesthood, and she confessed to getting over 1,000 priests who were communist into the priesthood.
Whoa.
So basically infiltrating the priesthood, intentionally
working to get 1,000 communists to infiltrate the church as priests.
Yeah.
Wow.
And people speculate, like, I wish we had a list of which ones they were, so we can know, like, oh yeah, that's Bishop Earl, or that was McCarrick, or whatever. The bad guys.
Why didn't they get a list from her at the time?
I don't know. I don't know if that list still exists, or if it just, I don't know if the Library of Congress has it, because she testified before Congress. But I don't know if a list was ever given to them of the actual men she put in.
Congress sucks sometimes.
It's like, why don't you guys get rid of those 1,000 or more priests? That would have saved the church a lot of heartache.
Yeah.
So, and the communists and the Freemasons and all that, they all go under different names and different times, but they really were working together. the evil guys always work together. Take the different evil groups that we got going around today. They always work together for their ends.
Oh, yeah, well, for sure. So just for me and for the sake of simplicity, lay out like a very short list of the biggest changes Vatican II made to the Mass and
Sure.
like the church in general. What are the biggest changes? Just listing them out, basically.
Yeah, so the biggest, one of them we already spoke about, of emphasizing the Mass as a supper rather than a sacrifice.
Right.
So erasing Christ and the whole idea that we can go to Calvary and that we can basically get all the graces Christ got on the cross. That was totally gone. I mean, that's why most Catholics, especially in the Novus Order, don't even know, like, wait, I'm going to Calvary? So that was one of the biggest things. Then they took away this idea of, everything we do, the gestures, proves what we believe. So they wanted to take away the true presence. And we call the true presence, understanding that Christ is present in the bread that's changed by the priest by the consecration so that it becomes the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ.
Transubstantiation, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great word.
I'm still learning this, so.
Great word.
Yeah.
So they wanted to take that away. They wanted it to be more Protestant-like it's just Kool-Aid and crackers or whatever. Horrible, really. But they did it they said, so there's an old law that says lex orandi, lex credendi. So the way that you pray shows what you believe. So they knew it wouldn't work if we start telling Catholics, like, hey, it's not the body and blood, soul, and divinity of Christ. They knew that wouldn't work. Instead, they changed what Catholics do to worship Christ. So they took away the kneeling, they took away the altar rails, they took away even the kneelers in the pews at the time. My mom says she remembers everything being stripped out of the church, from the statues that kind of showed the devotion of the saints to Christ, all the way down to the altar rail. She was actually going to make her first communion that year. And the changes came in, so they took away the communion rail. So that idea of reverence to Christ, there was no kneeling for communion. So she was getting ready to, kneel down, receive her first communion. That was gone.
See, that's weird, because it seems like to me that the idea was to strip away not just anything that represented the sacrifice, but anything that represented any significant reverence, right?
Well, it's all related.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the deeper if you don't know why you're there and what it is that you're there for, that's why guitars and
that's how the guitars see
drums and all that. Because if you picture that at Calvary, you just can't, because that's not how you're supposed to be at Calvary. Would you be there playing guitar at Calvary?
Yeah,
I don't think so.
Right.
So that was the central thing. And if you take that away, and anything's doable. Like you still have Catholics fighting, like, why can't I play my trumpet at Mass? Or my guitar at Mass, or why can't I dance at Mass? And I'm like, because that's not what's going on.
Because we're not cringe.
We're not being around a campfire right now.
Yeah.
So you can sing your hokey pokey song.
Gosh.
But there's some. It's interesting, but some people make the argument that Africans have to dance at Mass, for example. And it's simply not true.
Who says that?
Well, it's some Novus Ordo priest and all that. Like, the Africans have to dance at Mass. It's part of their culture. But the thing is, with Catholic means universal. Yeah. So we're a universal culture. It doesn't matter where you are. And it's always worked like that. It's worked perfect because you're centered around Christ. He is our head, and he is our goal. And he gives us all the graces for what we need for whatever culture we find ourselves in. But we never make him what our culture is.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So that was their kind of thing, and they did it with the Vatican II. They did this idea of enculturation. That's why you had the Pachamama Mass with Pope Francis, for example.
Yeah, describe that.
Well, the Pachamama thing, it's not even a mass, really, but they put Pachamama, which is a wooden statue about that big, ugly looking thing. It's wooden, has like a pregnant woman on there, and it's back to some Amazonian religion of a fake goddess. It's a fake goddess, really. And behind every fake god, by the way, is a demon. So there's some type of demon that they're worshiping. And they brought it into, my sister and I were actually in Rome at the time. They brought it into a church that was known. So you have St. Peter's here, and you walk down this road, and there's a church here in front of St. Peter's. I forget the name of the church, but it was the church known to be the papal exorcist church. so Father Morth. And one Italian lady told me, she goes, what they're doing, bringing in all these demons, is a direct smack against the exorcist of the Vatican. At the time, he's a good exorcist. But they brought him into his church first, before St. Peter's. And so they brought him in there. They had a whole setup of canoes and, I don't know, weird, Amazonian things going on. But the Pachamama was the center. And you had that worshipped in the Vatican gardens. And they also brought it and put it on a Catholic altar in St. Peter's. And people were just scandalized. You're basically putting an idol, on the altar of Christ, the true God.
So this is crazy, because you're using a pretty strong word here. You're saying worshipped. So you're saying, how are people worshiping it? Like, how do you know it wasn't just there and just a nice little symbolic thing?
Yeah. Well, different people analyzed different things that was going on, but the worship of the Pachamama was involved in this bowing down, and
people were bowing to it.
Oh yeah, there's a video you could go watch, the worshiping of Pachamama at the Vatican. So
how long ago was this?
Well, I think that was 2020.
Oh, that's freaky.
Yeah, I think it was 2020. Or no, it was before COVID. So right before COVID. So that must have been 2019, actually. So, and people were so scandalized, they had, at the time they didn't know who did this, but they ended up stealing the Pachamama and throwing it into the Tiber River.
Oh, okay, so that's what it was. Okay,
so the
I remember
Pachamama
hearing
thrower,
about that.
Alexandra Clark. Yes.
What a hero.
So, yeah, and everyone thought of him as a hero. There were some that were complaining like, oh, that was, very disrespectful. That goes against what the Pope's going for right now. And everyone's like, no, that's like the true Catholic thing to do, to get that demon and throw it into the Tiber and get rid of it.
Can't do that often enough.
Yeah, so, and that was the proper response for any Catholic, for stuff that goes on that's scandalous and that's evil. And, I mean, putting a demonic idol on the altar of Christ, I mean, that shouldn't make you infuriating and mad, that something like that is going on. And so those Catholics took the right action. Pulling it off the altar and tossing it into the Tiber was excellent.
That's fantastic. So I guess, would you say that, I mean, today, Catholics, most modern Catholics, I think you'd say it's safe to say that most modern Catholics do not understand that what the purpose of the Mass is. That the purpose of the Mass is a performance of the sacrifice. It is the sacrifice, right? Would you say most Catholics don't understand that today?
In my experience, most people don't.
And do you attribute that solely or mainly to Vatican II?
That's the bomb that hit the Mass. Basically, the Mass still existed up until Vatican II, and then they threw the bomb on it, and then they tried to say it's outlawed to say the traditional Latin Mass. And so there was this huge battle that ended up happening with the forbidding of that Mass and the new Mass, the Novus Ordo Mass, new order of Mass, promoted. Everyone was supposed to make the change. And so you had priests who, I think, had a really good understanding. So they said, no, I'm not going to go with these changes. And they remained faithful, and they continue saying that Mass until the day they died. For example, there's even a modern saint. The modernists don't like you bringing him up. But St. Pius, it's not St. Pius, St. Padre Pio, he was supposed to start saying because he was during that transition period, to start offering the Novus Ordo. And he begged to continue saying the Trinity Mass only, so he died, to his last day, saying that only the true Mass, as we call it. And so there was this whole back and forth of priests that would remain faithful, and then priests that tried to beg Rome to fix it, or a delay in some of the action, and then a whole sweep of them just went with it, and it's kind of the devil's little tactic, big tactic if you want to call it that, I guess, that he used obedience during the time of Vatican II to force people to just go along with it. Because you have to remember, we just got out of the I mean, everything takes decades and centuries sometimes, but you have the Protestant revolt happen in the 1517 and afterwards. And the biggest thing they would attack is on the papacy, for example, or on obedience to the Ten Commandments. You had different Protestants believing different things about the Ten Commandments now and all that stuff. So there was always this fight to always obey Christ and obey the church. And so when they tried to make the changes, And this happened. One nun told me, someone came in and said, well, you got to stop kneeling, you
Wow.
know. And she's like, well, why? Well, you just got to obey because that's what's coming from Rome. And so, like, some of them just like, okay, well, we'll do that just because you're right. We got to obey. Some of them didn't figure it out. Like, wait, why are we jumping off the bridge on this point? You know?
So if the Pope tells you to worship the devil, then you just gotta worship the devil, right? That's like the mindset. Almost. That
was some of the mindset, yeah. And a lot of them didn't understand. Like one priest told me, he said when he was supposed to offer his Novus Ordo Mass after trying to learn how to do it, which it wasn't that difficult. But he said they put in some nuns without habits. They just came. And they had a guitar, and they were going to sing the hymn Kumbaya. Ugh. And he's like, that's something like you sing at a campfire. He's like, so everything changed all at once for him. He's like, the music changed, the nuns without habits changed. And he asked his sister, but why are we singing Kumbaya? Oh, Father, don't question this. I was sent here to help you to initiate the changes. This
is reflective of what I also... Another nickname I have for the new the new Mass... is the Boomer Ordo, right? Because that is such a like bad boomer thing to do. There's good boomers out there, but that's a very Boomer Ordo. Very Boomer Ordo. I think so.
Yeah.
I have a few names for it. That's one of many.
Yeah, and that's why they say it's dying out. The boomer age is coming to an end.
Yeah.
All these people who promoted it or went with it or whatever. And some of them, like I talked to one lay faithful, she remembers the Latin Mass. And I said, well, how come you don't go back since it's coming back?
Right.
She goes, well, I kind of went along with everything. And, the priest didn't say it was bad. The Pope didn't say it was bad. Like nobody told me it was bad. So I basically grew up most of my life, 40 years of it at least, with the new Mass. So, how can I basically now turn around and say that was all a lie for the last 40 years? So it's a big bad thing that ended up happening for the whole church. And it's across the globe. It's not just in one place. It was everywhere that this was implemented. That's why I call it a nuclear bomb went off in the church with Vatican II that destroyed it on so many levels.
Now, there's another aspect of Vatican II that I've been privy to some extent. I haven't read the documents officially, but I've heard that there was a huge relativism push. There was a huge push to water down the Catholic faith and to even to make it seem like other people who didn't even follow Christ, people who were not even Christians in the least bit, were considered to be saved by God, as per the hierarchy in the church. So you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. It's well, like you can point back to Vatican II again. One of the other changes they did is they brought in 6 Protestant ministers to help formulate what the Mass should be, what Catholic worship should be, how to make it more Protestant-wise.
That doesn't make any sense to me.
No, it doesn't. It shouldn't, because it doesn't make any sense why they did that. But there's a picture. You can go back and look at the 6 Protestants, and they have their names and who they were. They were there to tell Catholics basically how to become more Protestant so they could be more friendly, more nice. Because you see, before, it was known that the Catholic Church is the one true church. It was a church founded by Christ. I think it's existed ever since that time, despite persecution, despite whatever. And you have these Protestants coming in and say, well, you got to tone it down a bit. Like, we don't believe this and we don't believe that. And, it'd be nicer if you just didn't do that. Like, for example, the kneeling that I was telling you about, the gesture. You guys kneeling is not what we do in any Protestant church towards a piece of bread, But that's what they wanted to emphasize. Well, it is just a piece of bread. It isn't Christ, because we don't believe that. I mean, we do communion in our church, some of these Protestants would say, and the communion they did in their church was with Kool-Aid and crackers. There was no consecration, no transubstantiation. That can't be. And so they wanted to de-emphasize that so that they can say that that's not Christ anymore. And then it could be more friendly and open, this idea of relativism, like what's true for you isn't true for me, so we got to come up with an in-between, a gray area.
Yeah, but basically. it seems so wild. I mean, I've heard of a situation where didn't they at some point bring in like actual Muslims as well? Or is that not part of Vatican II?
Well, no, you're right. So there was other religions that were brought in besides Protestants. There was even Hindus and all that. JP2 is known, Pope John Paul II, was known as the one that kind of brought in all the different religions. You have the scandal that happened. This is in Assisi. There's a beautiful church of St. Francis of Assisi there. He's probably rolling in his grave when it happened. But they invited all these different religions to come in. And I'm talking about all the different religions, including what you can probably not call a religion, but it is for Muslims, for example, or Wiccas. There was a ceremony.
They brought Wiccans in?
Well, there's a video. I don't know if there's a video. There's a picture.
Let me pause you for a second. When is this that we're talking about? This is during JP2?
So, JP2, during JP2.
Okay, so is that also when the Muslims were brought into the church, or did that also happen during Vatican II?
Yeah, well, consider it so Vatican II happened during John the 23rd and then Paul VI. But afterwards, they say that the implementation of Vatican II really came in during Pope John Paul II.
Ah, that's fascinating. Okay, you have to explain to us why.
And he's the longest reigning pope that was there for the longest time after the whole Vatican II. So He had the time to do this and that or whatever. But he back to the Wiccan thing, He allowed the ceremony of the Wiccan. They have some kind of sorry for the image is going to give you, but some kind of poop, and they put it on his face as part of their ritual.
They put crap on the Pope's face?
And everyone scandalized, like, why is he allowing this? And then the Muslims would come, and they gave him the Quran to kiss. They said, kiss it, and so he kisses it. And so just one scandal after another. The faithful weren't even sure how to handle this. They're like, that's like, like back, to put this in your mind, you have the early Christians in the church, back at the time, right after Christ. And the Romans are persecuting them, right? Rounding them up, burning them, crucifying them, feeding them to the lions in the Colosseum. And most of the times they were asked, just put a pinch of incense, to whatever God, and we'll just let you be a Christian, just give a pinch of incense to the idols here, at this temple or whatever, and we'll let you go. You just have to show a little bit of, friendliness, whatever you want to call it. And they would refuse. Not even a single pinch of incense would they give in order to save their lives. They said, we're not denying Christ at all. And we're not going to say you're false gods or some kind of god that we should worship. So then they would, of course, go to their martyrdom. But the scandal of him allowing, kissing the Quran, allowing all these different ceremonies. Buddha was put up on one of the altars that actually had Christ in the sacrament behind him. It was just one scandal after another. They call it the Assisi scandal. If you look up, anybody can Google the Assisi scandal. It started with JB2 doing all those ceremonies with all different religions. And it was just like this act of, when St. Pius X said is a synthesis of all the heresy as well, that kind of what it ended up, the end result is that all religions are accepted. Catholicism isn't the true one religion anymore. All religions are good, and we should all participate in all of them, or be friendly to all of them, or accept all of them. And that was another one of the push from Vatican II that be the case.
So you're saying that John Paul was continuing the mindset of Vatican II and the spirit of Vatican II.
Oh yes,
when he did all that.
Oh yes,
right?
yes.
So,
and he would claim it in the spirit of Vatican II too. It's funny you mentioned that.
See, this is like kind of what freaks me out, because I walked into Christendom College. And I was just curious about what kind of like Catholic books they had and whatnot. And my dog is very verbal right now. Oh my gosh. Look at this guy. Anyway.
He has something to say
he's
about
behind
Vatican
me
II.
just going. Anyway. So. Listen to him.
Sounds like he's barfing his Vatican II.
Yeah. He's venting. But no, so I go into Christendom College, and it seemed like every single book, like every other book, maybe probably more than every other book, was portraying JP2, John Paul II, as like this hardcore, like super capitalist conservative guy that saved the church, and it made me come to the conclusion that he's kind of like the George W. Bush of conservatism, right?
That's a good way to put it.
It's like everyone today cringes at George W. Bush. That's like a reasonable conservative.
Exactly, because you know exactly what he stood for, what he did, and how it wasn't really the best and all that. And JP2, I found out it was kind of like a cult. Because he's known as the Pope that went around to all these different countries, and there was lots of fanfare and all that stuff. And I asked one person one time, I said, can you give me, because he said he's JP2 the Great, you know, he's just so wonderful. And I said, well, give me just two reasons why he's great. Silence.
Oh,
and I said, just give me one. Well, you know, he was good with people. Ooh. I said, that doesn't make you great if you're good with people.
Yeah.
So I said, and then later they declared the Vatican II Catholics, as you want to call them, declared him a saint. And that also became a scandal in the church because he had all these things that he did wrong. And people were like, you can't declare someone that pinched the incense to the idols, that accepted all these things and did all these things and destroyed a lot of things, a saint in the church.
Who had crap put on his head. I'm sorry, that's weird. That's
know.
Weird, guys. That's really weird.
Yeah. And people are like, you know, that's not true, whatever. I said, well, one, there's pictures, so you can go see the pictures yourself. Two, if you really want to read everything that was going on at the time, there was a historian. He was actually a spiritual son of Padre Pio, and his name was Father Villa, Villa. And he wrote. He was commissioned basically by Saint Padre Pio to go and write basically historic documents regarding these different scandals. So he did one on JP2, which you can look up, Father Villa, JP2. It'll pop right up, and he wrote it really nicely. So he lays out what happened, where was it, and then pictures. So you could see the pictures of what was going on. So you could see the picture of the Pope with the Wiccan, and the whole ceremony. Because I don't understand the whole ceremony that they're doing, but it was part of the ceremony of the Wiccan to do that, and yeah, it's just horrible.
All right, so now tell us about the visual things in the Mass that were changed. Things like the direction the priest is facing and whatnot. Talk a little bit about how Vatican II changed that and why.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the changing of the priest to the people was, well, at the time they claimed we're going back to a more ancient way of doing things, which is simply not true. It's all false. There were certain very old churches, the way that they were built, that they had to stand in a different way, but that didn't mean anything about the reason how Mass was actually going down. So you always had the priest facing God and offering the sacrifice, because he's acting in persona Christi. Well, they wanted to emphasize supper, so that means, like Christ was, you turn towards the people and you have supper with them. That's what's going on. So there was that connection back to the supper and not the sacrifice. And so the visual of that was to have the priest now face the people and be kind of one with them. You know, you're on the dinner table with them, you're discussing something, there's no sacrifice really going on. And so it became, what really dramatically changed was this focus off of Christ. You know, sometimes they would even remove the tabernacles and put them in the back of the church or put them into a side room. So those were taken away. And you had the priest become the center. So they would put his chair right where the tabernacle used to be. And, you know, kind of center seat like Christ was at the Last Supper or whatever. And it would become a focus, like the Protestants have this whole focus of it's mostly about the sermon and how good the priest talks and how much he can entertain you. Well, they turned to that kind of focus, where the priest now is the focus. You know, we're waiting for Father so-and-so to throw out his joke, make us laugh, and then, you know, help us with some prayers and, you know, maybe some entertainment with some music and stuff like that. So you can see how the orientation completely changed from, you know, theocentric, as we call it, so God-centered, to centered on man. It was more of, you know, with, you know, you had, for example, too, the holding of the hands in the Our Father came in, which I don't know if some Protestants do that. They probably do, but the Catholics never did that, because the Our Father was prayed by the priest. And some converts get confused. They're like, why is the priest only praying it? I thought we could all pray the Our Father. Well, yes, but you don't understand. At the moment that the priest is saying the Our Father, he's saying the last words of Christ, because Christ prayed for us on the cross. He's saying the last prayer that he was saying to God the Father for our souls. You know, because he died on the cross for love of us. And so at that moment, the priest acting in persona Christi is saying this prayer, the Our Father prayer, with the Our Father, there's 7 petitions, and so he's saying the 7 last words of Christ. Basically, that's what's, in a mysterious way conjoining at the same time, and we're there witnessing that action of Christ praying for us at the Mass, and so we have this orientation all changed, where now we hold hands and we're all almost like a kumbaya moment, holding hands during the Our Father. We're all praying it together now, because that's, they wanted to change that erase the whole mystery that was going behind that.
So wait, Vatican II started this pattern of people holding their hands while doing the Our Father?
And everyone praying the Our Father together with the priest. Yeah.
Wow. That's so cringy. That's just lame. I mean, obviously the sacrilegious aspect of it is horrendous, but
yeah,
it's also extremely lame.
It is. I mean, the whole. I mean, they did a pretty good job in erasing the whole idea of what the Mass was, with the different gestures and what they're doing and why we're not going to do that anymore.
It kind of reminds me of, and because I'm former, I don't know, non-denominational Baptist / Protestant. I don't even know how to identify all that crud anymore, but. Yeah, because it's just so amorphous, right? But
right.
It reminds me of the worst moment for me. I am an introvert in church, is where they just where the pastor goes, all right, and everyone greet the person next to you. Like, you're not capable of doing that on your own as a normal human being. Like, I feel like an emasculated, like, 4-year-old when, like, you say hi to the person next to you. I'm like, leave me alone.
Right. Well, that's what the focus was. It was off of this. I mean, it's normal to have a love of your brethren, right? We're supposed to love our neighbor. But when they took the love of God away, the focus on God first, then men, then that's why there was an overemphasis in the wrong area. So you had this, ooey gooey, everyone give the person in the pew a hug and a kiss or a great handshake, slap, whatever.
Yeah, like, what if they smell bad, okay? What if they don't have good hygiene, right? Then this becomes a problem, and then you don't have such a favorable opinion. I'm serious. Like, that's, no.
Yeah, well, that was something that was emphasized with the Novus Ordo, was this whole... It's about you and about how you feel, and so if you can make them feel good, technically, hug makes people feel good, whatever, let's introduce that into the Mass. Let's make the kiss of peace basically this whole warm, ooey gooey greeting. Everyone walk around the church and give each other hugs and kisses, whatever. And the whole focus was...
That's so forced, though. That's so inauthentic.
Well,
like, okay, everyone go kiss each other. Like, what?
Yeah.
No, you... Like, get out of here, dude. Like, leave me alone. That's
when you
gross.
have your love focused on God, your love of neighbor flows naturally.
Yeah,
and in a normal way.
Yeah.
But when you're emphasizing love of neighbor above love of God, because now he's out of the church, he's not the focus, he's not, everything. So then this overemphasizing in other areas comes into play. And I think...
So you just get filled with God, and then you can kiss and hug organically, right? You don't have to get told to kiss and hug. You'll naturally do it when it's appropriate.
Right. I mean, just take for our chapel here, for example. I hear even strangers come in, they're like, wow, the love of God is, like, really in here. And they feel it because that love is then extended to them, saying, well, I felt really welcomed. They didn't have some big, juicy, Novus Ordo welcome thing going on. But they still were part of this deeper love that's going on, with the focus being in the right place. And then everything else just kind of flows, from that. Yeah.
So this is all very fascinating. Now let's move to the SSPX. What is it, and why was it created?
Sure. So, like I told you, there was different priests, or some priests, and mostly there was what we call independent priest. When the changes came, they decided, I'm just going to stick to it. And all that. But others, they wanted a more organized resistance, as it were. And so we have Archbishop Lefebvre at the time. He was actually papal nuncio to various places, but Africa being one of them. Very high up, very well respected in the Vatican. And during the changes, he was actually near retirement. So he actually kind of was going into retirement. And these seminarians, and he saw what was happening. At first, he thought, Vatican II might be something good because we have different issues. There was different things that were presented at the actual council that looked like they were good. Like, oh yeah, we got to focus on this problem and fix that. But actually, what ended up happening was none of fixing the problems that were there. They totally redid everything. The bomb went off and destroyed every aspect in every different way. I mean, it takes us hours to talk about the different things, but he decided to basically just continue to be faithful and to resist. And so these seminarians came knocking to him one time. A group of them says, hey, we want to be ordained as traditional priests. We don't want to offer this new mass. We don't have anything to do with it. We just want to continue doing what the church has always done. What was sacred then can't be not sacred now, and so forth. And he's like, no, I don't know if I could do that. I don't think so. And then they kept asking, and they kept, the great fortitude they had. He eventually gives in because he sees no other option, that there isn't a traditional, they basically destroyed them all. There is no traditional seminary making traditional priest, as we call them, the ones that offer up the traditional mass. And so he starts one, and he takes under his, takes the name St. Pius X as their great patron, who fought against modernism, which is what was infecting the church and still is. And he goes and he tries to make it we call it regular with Rome. So anybody can start up an order, like say you're inspired by God, or maybe you're in an order and you want to start a new order or whatever. There's different saints that did different ways of starting orders. And what you do is you basically organize yourself. Then you come up with your rules and your regulations and so forth. And then you submit that to Rome for approval.
Wow.
So you can be officially recognized, basically, in the church.
So wait, I could start an order to call the Novus Ordo the New Order?
Yeah, highly likely not to be approved.
But you see, here's the thing, though. If they want... Now, we didn't really talk about this as much, but the New Order Mass is in English, right? Or the language, wherever it's at,
right? The change of the language, yes.
That the whole change of the language going on. It's like, well, if you want the Mass to be in English, then why not call it by what you'd call it in English? Why code it with this Latin words? Why just say New Order, right? Right. But that title hasn't aged so well today.
Yeah.
Now,
the interesting point is a good point you bring up. The why they kept the Novus Ordo in Novus Ordo is because they the Latin language is a universal language of the church. It's what made us one. So you have to go back up to the Tower of Babel. We got punished by God for trying to get to heaven without him. And so they got scattered with all these different languages and had to struggle with that ever since. So the uniting thing when Christ came to save us and unite us back now and bring us to heaven and open the gates of heaven, we all took under one language now. So we kind of got united in such a strong way. And yeah, Vatican II wanted to destroy that. So they kept Novus Ordo because everyone could figure out what that means, because everyone at the time knew the Latin. And so it's a new order. You got to follow these new orders coming out of Vatican, the new order of Mass. And so that was kept, but it wasn't just switched to English. If you were in, Poland, you'd be Polish. If you were in, whatever language, Spain, it would be Spanish, so forth. So the Mass changed to all these different languages, basically to disunite us, to break up that great unity we had there.
So what you're saying is basically Vatican II recreated and rebuilt the Tower of Babel.
Basically, yeah. Because you move God out of the way and say you could do it yourself. Yeah. That's a good way to put it, yeah.
I mean, you started with that reference, right? So it makes sense.
Yeah, that is the conclusion. So that's exactly what they did. Because now we have, and that's why you see some Catholics fighting each other over some dogma or doctrine, because before we can talk about it in the same language. And now you have, a particular point being debated because, well, actually it really means this in English. When you're like, no, it really means this in Spanish. Well, you believe that and I'll believe that. But the Latin united us. Like, no, this is, and that's why all the dogmas and doctrines that were proclaimed in the church were always put in Latin. I mean, St. Pius X, all his stuff's in Latin. And not all of it has been translated yet either. But I was like, I could probably help now with some of that. But
I don't know if I trust them that much. But
I know, right?
Have to see. But
the modernists have taken it over.
Let's take a slight step back and talk about the leftist aspect of the changes made during Vatican II. Can you talk a little bit about the leftist impact, which a lot of it does overlap with the modernism and New Masonry and all that?
Yeah, it does, because they have this whole push, for example, in the United States, they had the whole push for abortion. That was shortly after, the changes of Vatican II. And they thought, now that we have this, new mass, basically new doctrine, new way in Catholicism, we could probably have abortion. Why not? So you had these leftist advocating for this. Like, for example, we had, I know a parish shortly after the changes in New Mexico, which is very big on abortion. They apparently have some satanic temple abortion altar set up.
Freaky.
And very evil. So they had a woman that would advocate and start talking to all the girls in the church about getting an abortion or get on contraception. Basically just, be free. That was the thing, to be free, have a free choice, etc. Take control. There's this whole push of feminism with the leftist, and that also involved with no more stay-at-home mothers, no more babies, all that whole push. And so she was doing that, and the priest at the time was very disagreeing. So what he ended up doing is, those abortion pictures where it shows exactly what the abortion is?
Yeah.
So he put them up at the stations across all around the inside of the church. He put one picture of each different phase, up around the church on the side, so that everyone can see, well, this is what she's advocating for. I want none of my people to do this. This is evil. It's not a clump of tissue, blah, 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 all these lies that they were putting out. And so that was one priest's extreme way to try to fight the leftists that were just pouring in these ideas now.
Wow.
And basically just, going in full swing with it. So, people are shocked, Father, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But actually this was being heavily pushed by these leftists in the church. So he had to do some kind of action to kind of clarify, what really is going on. So.
Well, the reason why I bring up the leftism aspect of it is because of the very obvious way that the church has been changed and shaped through the laymen, particularly, the priests as well, but particularly with the laymen, you notice that, it's about 50% more or less of people who consider themselves Catholic consider themselves okay with abortion, right?
Right.
We've seen statistics like that. But, you look at the fruit, right? You look at the fruit of the New Order Church, and there's a lot less kids being made. Abortions, it's okay, I guess, a lot, not necessarily in what the church says, but in just the laymen and what they believe, right? They it seems like they take the faith a lot less seriously. But talk a little bit about how Vatican II has made the church generally more leftist.
Right, yeah.
In modern day times.
Well, when you take a strong stance on truth, that truth is absolute, that it can't be so otherwise, then it's like the principle of non-contradiction. What is, or it isn't, So you had a lot of the lies that kind of became kind of the foundation for the Vatican II. For example, the whole accepting of evolution, or the accepting of abortion in different cases because, according to science, it's just a clump of tissue. All these there were lies being pushed that obviously you can defeat with the truth. But because their stance wasn't strong on the dogmas and doctrine of the church, because they can quote unquote evolve, that was what modernism was pushing. We don't have to believe this now because modern science has told us, this is really the case. So it's not a bad thing, different things like that. It's kind of so, one of the theologians would describe modernism as so subtle that even a normal person can get, taken with it.
Yeah.
And it's because of different things like that with the lie, where they say they found the missing link for evolution, oh, look, we found the missing link, if we evolved from monkeys or apes, as one of my professor would say, don't call it monkeys as apes. Really. Anyways, there would be a lot of proof of that. You can see this transition period. You dig up the bones and see oh yeah, there's a half man, half monkey, whatever. But it was so ridiculous, but people really believed it. They're oh wow, look, there is a missing link. And they later found out it was a woman who got different bone pieces and constructing it all together to help further the lie of evolution.
Wow.
And really, the evolution takes you to the belief that there is no God.
Right.
That you are your own God. And so that whole push in the church came to be so that, you can't tell me that I can't, for example, divorce became very big when it wasn't in the church. Like if you look at the divorce rates, I forget what the numbers, I won't say, but the divorce rates before Vatican II were very low. After Vatican II, they're super high. You have cohabitation, you have divorce, you have an increase in abortions. It's like, what happened? They threw out all these dogmas and doctrines of the church. They threw out the truth, and they promoted all these lies. And so people just kind of followed like sheep in a certain sense, that they didn't see some of these lies, and some did, and some try to, fix that. But it's a big mess.
Yeah, no, it just my alarm bells go off a little bit, because when I'm looking at like leftist tactics, it's just such a perfect tactic for them to take something that is a bastion and a creator of political conservatism and to infiltrate it and water it down, right, into something where, well, you can kind of be on either side, when before it was like you were just a hardcore conservative for sure if you were a Catholic, right, like 99.9% of the time.
Where all those moral lines were erased.
Yeah,
the gray came in, the gray cloud that covered all these lines that you're not supposed to cross.
It's just so tactically convenient that it makes me think that someone like Bunini and others like him were politically motivated to do this.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's why, the Freemasons are 100% politically motivated to make sure that the destruction of the Catholic Church happens. So you have all that infiltrating and changes that they knew what they were doing. Like I said, the Lux Orandi, Lux Credendi, the way that you pray shows what you believe. When they changed the way Catholics believed, they knew they had to do it by how they worshipped and how they believed. So that's why all the gestures had to change. And so when you change the way they pray, you can ultimately change what they believe. And so that's ended up what happening. So just start changing, like, for example, one of the big things that happened, especially in the U.S., and I'm sure it was all over, is the stripping of the churches. They had to take away all of the Catholic statues, a lot of the decor. Like you have, if you look back and it isn't in the Library of Congress too, you can look back at some of the old churches that some of the missionaries had made, either the French or the Franciscan, etc., or even the Canadians churches up in New England. You had these beautiful churches, gold, like the awe-inspiring, it's supposed to lift your mind to God. They put white paint on everything. There's whitewashed everything. It was such a, and that when you look at the before and the after pictures, you're just like, what happened? It was like a totally erasing of all that was good, of all that was true, all that helped to direct our minds to God, and just whitewashed it. Like, well, Protestants don't have all these decorations. They don't have statues to saints. They think that's worshiping the saints, and things like that. And so we had to get rid of it all.
Right.
Whitewash the church from all of its decor, and then get rid of the saint statues, and let's just get nice and cozy with everybody else in the world besides what the faith is really about. So
tell me about moving back forward to the Society St. Pius X, the SSPX.
Oh, yes.
So we got an idea of how it started by Archbishop Lefebvre. How does it operate, and how does it differ from the New Order Church or the modern church?
Sure. So there's different groups out there that kind of started resistance, but the St. Pius X group is the biggest one that did the resistance to the New Order of Mass. And they tried to be friendly with the Vatican at first, because that's the normal Catholic thing to do, is be connected to Rome. Otherwise, you become disconnected and all this stuff. But what Archbishop Lefebvre found out is that he had great enemies that were stopping him. For example, he, quote-unquote, got excommunicated after he ordained bishops without Rome's permission. Now, he ended up, there's a whole story of back and forth that he had gotten permission, and then the permission was rejected, and he just knew that was more of the evil minutiae happening in the background. And the church, the highest law in the church, is the salvation of souls. So when the salvation of souls is in question or at stake, then whatever you're trying to do in Code of Canon Law, that highest law is what rules what's going on. So he saw, if you see, there was no other traditional seminary at the time. He was forming priest to offer the true Mass. And for the sake of the salvation of souls, to keep true to all the faith and dogmas and doctrine of the church, he had to consecrate more bishops in order to get more priests and etc. and to spread. And he was about to die. So if he died, the movement would have died with him. There would be no bishop to consecrate traditional priests going forward. Basically be dead. And so when he decided to make that movement, though, to go ahead for the sake of the salvation of souls to ordain these bishops so that the mission can continue, the church can continue, that's when you had some of them break up. And so that created the Fraternity of St. Peter, for example. They decided, no, we're not going to do this without Rome's permission. And so they formed the Fraternity of St. Peter, and to this day they're still waiting for their bishop that they were promised. That they said it was coming. It's like 35 years. Wow. Like, how long are you going to wait? Can't you see what's going on with the corruption and the way that things have happened? That option didn't work out for you, did it? Because you tried to do the right thing, but, Lefebvre, that's what he saw through, that there was some evil minutiae going on in the background that was going to prevent it no matter what. That the infiltration has reached to the high ranks in the Vatican. And Our Lady of Fatima and Our Lady of Good Success and several other apparitions of our Blessed Mother, she explained that, there would be bishops fighting bishops, and there would be this great scandal in the church, basically, and people have boiled it down to Vatican II and that whole thing. So it becomes a very black and white issue. Where do you stand? And so he took a stand because he saw clearly where it was going to go or where it wasn't going to go, and he continued to go on. So he went on without Rome and consecrated the bishops, and to this day they still survive.
And so, and I don't know if I'm phrasing this the right way, so you have to correct me if I'm not, but is it true that the first order of the church is to formulate priests? Or how am I saying this correctly? But what I mean is the SSPX, like one of their, like the first mission. How do you phrase that? Because I've heard something like this before.
Yeah, well, that was why they were first formed, was to form traditional Catholic priests. So that their first mission, as it were, wasn't to go out and be missionaries to this, group of Indians or Americans, whatever. It was, their mission was to form priests so they can continue offering the true sacrifice of the Mass. So that is their first. They formulated themselves as a Society of St. Pius X, but they're known as a Pious Union of Priests. So it was a union of priests getting together to accomplish the mission of being ordained as traditional priests to offer the true Mass. That makes sense. Yeah.
Now, so let's move to today. How do they, which I somewhat know the answer to this, but just for the sake of understanding and getting a better understanding of it for our audience and myself, how does the Society of St. Pius X, how does the SSPX decide when to follow the Pope and when not to follow the Pope?
Sure. Again, it comes down to the salvation of souls in that sense. So, for example, with Traditionis Custodes that came out during Pope Francis's papacy, this is 2020, basically it was a letter telling the whole world to stop saying the traditional Latin Mass and start transitioning to the Novus Ordo. And it's kind of getting interesting with some of that now, because there's rumors out there that there's actual person in the Vatican releasing. Pope Francis apparently did this because of the surveys from all the bishops globally, said they didn't like the Latin Mass, so they wanted to get rid of it. But actually the truth has come out now. Actually, most bishops were actually fine with the Latin Mass, and they kind of, some of them very favorable to it. So he based his whole push to ban the Latin Mass on a premise of a lie from the surveys, basically, is what came out just a few days ago. But wow. He, the St. Pius X's reaction to that is just continue on being faithful. Just resist, because it's not a legitimate law. It's not having the ultimate salvation of souls, for example, and it's the Mass too is not only a sacrifice for our salvation, but it's also the perfect worship that God wants given to him. So, for example, take the Israelites. They were promised to be saved. Moses bring them out to the promised land as long as they worship God how he wanted to be worshipped. And so he told Moses, take the people to the desert to worship me. So if you remember the Pharaoh and all the different plagues that got sent with mosquitoes and the blood and all this other stuff. Well, at one point, Pharaoh did get desperate, and he says, how about I give you the best temple, whatever they call it back then, the best piece of land or whatever, and you could worship your God here and then remain here. And Moses said, no, that's not the way God wants to be worshipped. We have to worship him the way he wants to be worshipped. So fast forward now to today, St. Pius X also knows that the duty that we have to worship God is found in the traditional Latin Mass. So they weren't going to just change, saying, well, we could just go to some watered down way of worshiping God. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to continue what the church has always done. So they continue to resist the ones that make no sense, and until we get a holy pope. That's kind of the way that Catholics have been dealing. I mean, we've had bad popes before where people just kind of ignore things that are... And the popes never, these bad popes that get in, they never declare, and this is very interesting, most Catholics don't catch this, but they never declare anything ex cathedra, which means binding by pain of mortal sin if you don't believe it.
Interesting.
And it's been the thing of the church where if you look in past, declarations from the church, they say, by the authority of God and through the chair of St. Peter, I declare, the assumption to be true, right? For example. Yeah. And so every Catholic had to believe the assumption was true. And that was actually the last dogma that was proclaimed. And that was in the 1800s. So, these infiltrators, in a certain sense, if you want to call them that, they never declare anything that's binding under sin. So you don't have to listen if they say, we got to do this new mass. Well, did you declare it dogma? Did you declare it something binding ex cathedra to all Catholics? No, it wasn't. And they even say so. It's just pastoral, it's a good idea, whatever. Many different excuses. But it's never declared as something absolute and true. Which it never can be.
It's just funny to me because it's like, okay, you think God's not watching you when you don't say that?
I know.
Just the whole concept to me is kind of ridiculous.
I know.
That
but
they
when you
wouldn't
see
say that all
the
time.
The leftists or the lies that have come throughout the different centuries, have you ever seen them declaring it truth because of, and they have all this backup data for it? They never do because it's not there. Yeah. So in other words, they can never declare no sort of true because the data or, the whole background is just not there. It's just not there to back them up because it's not true. So, and so the St. Pius X, they just continue to believe what has always been taught and resisting the different craziness that goes on. And that's always been the Catholic response.
So tell me about, let me throw an example at you of something where the SSPX will perhaps just look past, not necessarily look past, but not take action on, I guess would be a good way to phrase it potentially. So let's take Pope Francis talking about open borders and encouraging open borders in the United States and pushing against Trump on that. What is a typical response that the SSPX would have to something like that?
Yeah, well, in general, they don't get involved with too much of the politics things, which is kind of, on my side, it's kind of irritating because I'm very heavily involved in politics. So, and I think the reason is because they're fighting a very big battle. You got all of Vatican against you. You got the majority of the church against you. The pocket of faithful has always been kind of small, but it's a big war. And so you got to know where you're going to aim most of your ammo. And so they try to conserve, I think, some of their ammo to keep aiming at some of the big stuff, but don't waste it on some of this other stuff.
Well, and that's where, I'm actually looking at what a priest in the SSPX would probably do with that. It was probably just not pass that on to the layman, right? Is they would just ignore them saying that because it's not relevant to saving souls and might actually be it is actually harmful, I would argue, because of the amount of people that are, when you have open borders, it encourages tons of rapes, it encourages massive crime,
exactly,
human trafficking, these horrible things. So, but just seems like from my observations, that's sort of what I'm seeing. Is that correct observation to make about the priests of the SSPX? That
they don't make statements?
They would just ignore, not necessarily ignore that the Pope had said that completely, but they're not going to take something that's blatantly communistic and pass it on to their laymen.
Right. They're very good at laying down the foundation of the doctrine of the church, which, take St. Pius X, St. Thomas Aquinas, excuse me, he's heavily against illegals and the borders and for the death penalty, etc. So and they learn that, and they try to pass that on, but they pass it on in that sense, not really as a response to a direct quote from, Trump or whatever, but more of just kind of they're like, think of them like laying the foundation, but leaving the actual reality of stuff going on at the moment, they're just not going to get involved in. I mean, that's kind of frustrating in a certain sense, but other ways you can see the wisdom to that, so they don't get, like, oh, look, the SSPX just declared this, everyone attack,
Yeah.
And they're trying to avoid, they're already attacked, so they're trying to avoid getting attacked even further for different things. And you might, Father so-and-so might give you his opinion about whatever, or you might have a group of people having coffee and donuts and talk about it. That kind of stuff happens, but making an official declaration as a society, and it's very rare to see anything come out. That makes sense.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I'm trying to think about what the other thing I wanted to bring. Oh yes, of course. So we live in a town called Front Royal, and here there is a big New Order chapel here, church
Parish,
here,
yeah.
And it is there's a lot of people who are fiercely anti-SSPX, and they say it's because the SSPX is in schism, a thing called schism. Can you explain to us what schism is, and is the SSPX in it?
Right. So that's a good question. So the schism kind of comes from what we already talked about with Archbishop Lefebvre confirming the bishops without Rome. So basically, a schism is someone who separates himself from the true church and is no longer part of it. And that's simply not true. He did it for the sake of the church. That's why he ended up doing it. But because of the excommunication that got dropped on him without any trial, without any proper paper documents, etc., which you can't just, like, I declare, Matt an excommunicated Catholic. I can't do that because there's a proper channel, and all the proper channels are ignored. So most people, that were in the society knew that the excommunications weren't true, and the declaration that they were schismatic wasn't true. But other people on the outside that didn't really know what was going on, especially if you don't see the chaos going in the church, if you don't think anything bad's going on, then those type of people seem to believe that, oh yeah, those are like the heretics, the schismatics, the people who aren't with Rome, they're out of communion with Rome. That's some of the language. And to be in communion with Rome means you basically believe all the dogmas and doctrines of the church. Anytime you denied one of the aspects of the church in her dogmas or doctrines or tradition, then you were not in communion, because communion, as St. Paul puts it, we're of one heart, one faith, one baptism. And so this lie that they were saying, oh, they're schismatic, was really not true, because if you go to the heart of it, well, what dogma did they reject, for example? Give me one dogma they reject. Or give me one doctrine they don't believe anymore, that they threw out. Because sometimes they get called, oh, they're just a bunch of Protestants coming up with their own religion. What part is Protestant that we're continuing on, or that we decided to invent?
Yeah, it's quite the opposite.
This is the Mass, and this is the way Catholics believed, centuries and centuries. You have all these saints that believed exactly the same thing. Like, I talked to St. Bernadette one time when I went visiting in Lourdes, and we asked the guards, you get to ask the guards that are there for what masses are going on for the day. So my sister and I thought, oh, we'll ask the guards where's a Latin Mass, if there is one. And he's like, oh yeah, there is one. And there's this great big Basilica of Our Lady. It has two parts to it, and we're hoping it's in one of those. And he points behind, he goes, in that building way over there. And we're like, oh, well, figures it gets thrown out. Well, lo and behold, it ended up being a Latin priest, kind of like, from the area of Latinos kind of thing, not a Latin Mass. And we start going in, and we're figuring this out. And the priest comes up to my sister and grabs her on the shoulder. Hey, you want to do the gospel and the epistle and all that? I think it might just be us. My sister's like, like, what are we getting ourselves into? And I'm like, yeah, exactly. So he sits us in the pew and he says, I'm going to go get the altar ready. And he's doing really weird things up there at the altar, okay? Just slamming different things and all that. We know it's not going to be a Latin Mass. So I start praying to St. Bernard. I says, you didn't have this problem. You didn't have to deal with this. You just had the Mass. And there was no, like, you got to make sure you're getting to the right one or whatever. Yeah. And so I was kind of mad. I was just fuming at her saying this prayer. And I hit my sister. I said, let's go. We're getting out of here. We're not staying here because we didn't, when you start learning what it is and what's going on, it's not true worship of God. It's not really giving God his due when you've created something of your own making and you've stripped away all of the aspects of what Mass is. And so we leave and we go up to the bottom part of the basilica, and there's a slight room you walk into, and there's a relic of St. Bernard. I'm like, yeah, I know, I just finished yelling at you saying you didn't have this problem. And we both started crying because at that moment there's these stairs that are right next to her relic that go down to the crypt of the church. And there was a priest in full cassock, full beretta on his head, and like only traditional priests wear berettas on their head. And so we follow him as he's processing in to the crypt, and it was a Latin Mass. We're just like, wow. So God gives you, if you have a desire for it, God gives you some way or another to figure out, during the chaos of everything. So it's amazing. So I always tell people that too. I said, that's what, if you have a desire to seek God and to find him, he'll give you a way, And so St. Pius X Society found a way to continue on and to resist. And sometimes, they just don't get involved with different things in order to survive in this environment that we find ourselves in.
Makes sense. So I had someone tell me within the past year or so that he goes to the New Order Church, that the marriages don't count in the Society of St. Pius X. So like everything else is okay, but marriages are not legitimate. Do you know anything about where that comes from?
Yeah, I don't know where it comes from, but I think it's just another way to kind of knock the society. But they I don't know which, I think it might have been Benedict XVI, but it might have been JP2, or one of them actually said their marriages are fine. So as long as there is, witnesses, for the marriage is normal. Everyone has to have witnesses. But it's just another empty attack that they're just throwing out. Like, why would they not be?
Yeah.
Give me one reason. Are they doing some kind of ceremony that's different than the church has always done? Or are they using the old books that, it's the same ceremony that's been done in the church for centuries, So
let's also, one more thing to talk about with the Vatican II, unless something else comes to mind, which it could happen, but when it comes to Vatican II, can you talk about how bishops had the relationship change with bishops and their authority and what they could do suddenly after Vatican II came through? Like, how did that change the bishops and what they were able to do in their sections, in their respective areas?
Yeah, sure. There was this leftist liberal push that the laity didn't have nothing to do. And so they basically opened up the laity to take charge of different ways. So much in charge that even a parish priest wouldn't find himself in charge of a parish anymore, and a bishop wouldn't find himself in charge of his diocese. It was another way of breaking down the normal hierarchy that the church has established in order to keep proper order of everything. So they did that for the bishops in the sense of more having a collegiality, as they call it. And so there's this no more hierarchy, everyone's kind of equal, these leftist ideas, this brotherhood, of the bishops, instead of being these successors to the apostles. That's what a bishop is. He's a direct successor to the apostles. The laying on the hands have passed on from the time of the apostles to, that's why you can have, like, the Pope is tracked down all the way to St. Peter. And so there was this hierarchy, this idea. And, the leftists always cry against the hierarchy and, things like that. So they basically just wanted to destroy that, so that ultimately, if there was, like fast forward now, if there was a good bishop trying to establish order, it would be very difficult. He'd have to go through the proper channels, talk to laity so-and-so and all this. And I know priests, some traditional priests, who have realized, like, for example, simple little thing, he wanted to put kneelers into the church again. Simple. And you would think a priest of a parish can do that. Well, he had hell to fight, basically, with all the committees of these laity people that came after him for that. And so it was something so difficult. Or like, say he wants to just face the altar, face God instead of face the people. Big trouble, So these committees now ruled instead of the priest or instead of the bishop. They still had some sort of power in some sense, but it was more of a group effort now, which is very hard if you ever know of a group. To control a group in a certain way, to do this or that is very difficult.
So is this one group of laity committee, or is this multiple decentralized groups controlling each diocesan area?
It's a good question. I think in general they mostly had the same mindset. It's kind of like the Rules for Radicals, if you ever read that evil book dedicated to Satan. Yeah. So he talks about organization.
They say Lucifer. He says Lucifer in the forward. Yeah. Sick
exactly.
guy. He was trying to be funny, but he's a con artist.
He had the whole plan of how you work as a group.
Yeah.
And what you do for organizing.
Community organizing, weaponizing people against whatever it is you want them to do for you.
Exactly. So that's actually what ended up happening. And I think a lot of leftists and liberals took over some of these positions, and that's why you had such an extreme, overhaul in such a quick, drastic way. We had not hundreds, but thousands upon thousands of priests and religious that just left the church after Vatican II.
Wow.
They said it just wasn't the church anymore. They couldn't continue on or whatever. These communities would get on them, and
including my grandmother. She didn't. I don't think she knew about Vatican II necessarily, but she just know they stopped doing the Latin Mass, and she lost interest.
Yeah. Same with my grandparents too. My grandpa refused to go to Mass afterwards. He told my mom, he says, "That's not the Mass. Wow. I'm not going." So.
Absolutely wild. So then I guess we go to the question of how do we deal with this? How do we combat this infestation in the church, this leftist, relativistic, boomer ordo virus that's infected the church?
Yeah, well, it's like with everything when you just, there has to be a sense, well, two things. One, you have to desire to follow God. And I've seen that desire to follow God carry people who, like were stuck in the Novus Ordo forever. I came from the Novus Ordo. I was in the Novus Ordo for a while before coming to tradition. And if you have that desire to follow God, even if you know something that you did for like 40 years or whatever, like that one lady we were talking about, if you had a desire to follow God and to follow the truth, you wouldn't care so much as all my life's a lie that I can't say no now. No, you would say that's constantly what we're supposed to do is follow the truth, fight the good fight, as St. Paul says, which is against the flesh, the world, and the devil, and it comes in different ways. So this fighting as a church militant, that's what we're known on earth as a church militant. Fighting for the truth and the desire for that truth is key. And once you do that, then you I think part of fixing the error is learning what the truth is. If people actually read books of what the saints wrote on the Mass, it's amazing. I open up a book, I collect all these books too for different saints and what they wrote on the Mass. It's just amazing. You look at it and you're like, whoa, nobody writes like that anymore.
What's amazing about it?
Well, the way that they explain it. So, for example, you have St. Francis de Sales. He wrote a whole, about 10 pages on the Mass. And he puts priest and what he's doing, and then he'll put the Christ and what he's doing at the Mass. So you literally read through it line by line on what's going on at the Mass. And so they would do different things. You got St. Thomas Aquinas. He wrote a whole Summa section on it, on what the Mass is. You had different saints talking about different aspects of what's going on at the Mass in a mysterious way, or how do we get merit at Mass, or there was one priest. He was actually the spiritual director of St. Margaret Mary Alacoque, who's a promotion for the Sacred Heart. And he put in one of his writings, he says, if we truly understood the Mass, we would die to get there, because that's what all the martyrs and the saints did, and especially in the early church, they would die to get to Mass. They would go through these impossible ways. Can you imagine having to sneak down into the catacombs to just have Mass said? And to know that maybe when you come back up, you might get caught and fed to the lions. It's like, that's some serious stuff.
Wow.
So understanding what the truth is, the truth of the Mass, the truth of the faith, and reading about, learning. I tell all the people I run into, I said, if you just read this book or that book, by Saint this or Saint that, you would truly understand more, and they wouldn't be confused, they wouldn't be lost, they wouldn't, fight for these liberal, chaotic stuff we got going today. Because if they simply just understood what it really is, then they would understand. So I think that's a key is education. That's why I got into teaching, to try to spread that truth. Actually, that's the main reason why I switched from music major to theology major.
Wow!
So I can help with some of the teaching. It's
quite a jump.
Yeah, it was great though. It was all divine providence, really, and just educating people with that truth. And you don't have to be a teacher to do it. You could simply, you read something very inspiring, and then you share it with your neighbor, you share it with your friend, over coffee and donut or whatever too. But just little ways that you could do it to try to help build the understanding of it goes back to who we are, why are we here. I think a lot of people are lost in that today, and that's why you have all these suicide rates and things like that. Like they lost it. They totally don't know that there's a God that loves them, that came to save them, and gives them amazing graces and help in order to get to heaven. Because that's what we're aiming for. This life isn't it. If it is, and no wonder they're committing suicide. Like the weight that this road is at, I would commit suicide now. Joking. But no, if that is the only thing, then there's nothing to look forward to. There's nothing that's going to fulfill you, because we have a heart that's made for God, and He loves us, and He's desiring us to love Him. And when we love Him, then it fulfills all of our needs, all our desires. And that's why we're aiming for heaven, the ultimate joy there.
Before we wrap up, we've been going pretty long, but this has been really fun. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to stop where I go off in one way. I hope I answered the question.
No, it's just you are an encyclopedia, and I just love kind of just like asking a question and, just seeing what you come up with. It's a lot of fun. But I wanted to just ask about your experience teaching kids. When you're teaching children, I know you work with multiple ages. What are some interesting observations that you've noticed when you've been teaching them?
Yeah,
anything that stands out?
Anything that stands out? Well, I don't know. It's a joy teaching kids, and sometimes they teach you more in one day than you teach them. So it's something I can say that really stood out last Sunday when I was teaching some kids. These are my 3 to 5 year old class. And there was a few moms that asked if they can let their 2-year-old daughter come in. I said, yeah, so she doesn't act up. It's totally fine. Come on in. So she joins, and because she's the smallest in the group, we have this little activity we're doing for the Sacred Heart and, where Jesus is. And I have these pictures up on a board of the monstrance and the tabernacle and pictures of Jesus and stuff like that. And we're trying to learn about the real presence of where Christ is, and especially the monstrance. They just learned that a couple classes ago. So they get their little host they have in their hand. They have to go to the board and put where Jesus is. I made jokes with them, like, do we put it in the clouds here? Is Jesus right there? And they're like, no, not really. Like, we talked about the spiritual aspect or the real body, blood, soul, and divinity aspect. So they know the distinction. And I asked the 2-year-old, I said, why don't you go first? I gave her little host. And she runs to the board, and she puts it right smack dab in the middle of the monstrance.
Wow.
And one of her brothers, he's 5, he just goes, she can't do that. She's only 2. She's stupid. She doesn't know anything. Like, how could you do that? And she's looking at me like, did I do it right? And I'm like, you did it perfectly right. And he's like, but she's only 2. And I'm like, well, she got it. So you can't dumb down anything. I think that's what our culture likes to do, is dumb things down. People won't understand. But it's not true. Just show the truth, and it's so easy to get it. Like, even a 2-year-old could get it.
Well, and that just speaks to the design, I think, in human beings and how we're formulated by God, right? That she instinctively knew to do that.
Exactly.
Just went straight to the center.
Exactly. She wasn't in any of my past classes or anything. First time coming in, and yeah, it shocked everybody, I think. But I mean, that's the how beautiful the truth is, and that's what stands out to me, is that the truth, you can never be ashamed of it. You can never You should never lie against the truth. And just let the truth, it speaks for itself. It really does. And so, telling her the truth about what she has in her hand is, a representation of the host, which gets turned into the body, blood, soul, divinity of Christ. She was just like, okay, go find Jesus on the board. And she got it right away. So
incredible.
So, yeah.
Alexandra, thank you for coming on today. Thanks for your time.
Well, thanks, Matt, for you too. Keep up the good work.
I will endeavor to try as long as there's no floods in here. I do have to fix the lights. They're making us look shinier than we actually are. No, really. I've got to fix the diffusion on them. So sorry if we look a little... I got to look at the camera here. Sorry if you look a little shiny, guys. My bad. I've got to fix the diffusion on these things. So
oh, that's okay. No worries.
Hopefully I'll have that ready for episode 5. Yeah, we'll see. So anyway, thanks for coming on.
All right. Thanks, Matt. God bless.
You too.